I hadn't used for 20 years. I'd been using for 4 hours. The obsession and the allergy were on me. But, at some point very soon, I was thinking, where's the next line of cocaine coming from? 4 hours before I'd done anything for this woman, I wasn't giving her the big line of cocaine. But the reason I did service was, to make me look good. I never sponsored anyone. Nobody even asked me to sponsor them because, there was always that element of keeping people at a distance. Probably there's an element of people realise that, in the end, I was a bit of a fraud. When I wake up in the morning, my first thought is not about drinking and using. I have that freedom now.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode, I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Barry.
Barry, hi. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Good afternoon, thank you.
On 12 Steps and 12 Questions. It's really great to have you here. I've been wanting to interview you for quite some time. I'm so glad we were able to make it work. Could you introduce yourself quickly, please?
Yeah, so my name's Barry. I'm an addict. I'm an alcoholic. I'm in my mid-60s. I'm 12, just over 12 years and some months. 5 months, I think, clean. At the moment, 4 months clean. So my clean date is the 2nd of September. So I was 12 years last September.
Wow, 12 years. Yeah. Amazing. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Barry. Let's get straight to question one, which is, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
I didn't have any traumas, I don't think. The thing I identify when I think about my childhood is that I came from an unhappy home. My parents had an unhappy marriage. And they was at a time and partly their backgrounds where they were committed to staying together. And it meant that there was a lot of, and there was nothing ever happened in the home, yet nothing was right at the same time. There was a lot of unspoken things going on, a lot of passive aggression, a lot of anger, a lot of rebellion, a lot of, all of that was going on, manipulation. But none of it was being spoken out loud.
So no overt hostility?
Absolutely none at all, and it's like, it was sort of like, I think the way I look at it now is like there's part of me that I picked up on it and I knew stuff was not right, but yet when I looked around me, everything seemed to be normal. So it was like, what was going on?
It must be quite confusing.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
Yeah, I had a younger brother. He's not alive anymore. Yeah.
Did you share it with him at the time? Did you talk about it?
No. I mean, one of the things that happened was nobody ever spoke about how I felt. Nobody ever spoke about what was going on. And so I think it sort of picked up a pattern in me where I sort of, where I detached from and sort of stepped back from the circumstances I was in. The sign of my first ism for me is around the internal spiritual malady and the trying to fix that not feeling right inside myself, which is how I understand the ism. The first sign for me was around my brother and my behaviours towards him, because he was 18 months younger than me. Every brothers have, I'm sure there's sibling rivalry, but, I always had to be better than him. And it was if my brother Toby, his name was, if he was doing something and he was enjoying himself, it didn't have to be affecting me at all. I would sort of spoil it for him in a way,
Wow.
At least that's how I see it now. I don't know how he saw it. I don't know what it was really like at the time, but I just think of that and I think, so we were never close, which was silly, because the one thing that I probably wanted, because my brother was a really nice guy. If I'd have just been nice to him, he would have sort of hero worshipped me and, all that sort of thing. But I could never accept anything from him.
It must have been quite a solitary experience, the way you're describing it, in that, so I have an older sister, and when there was weird stuff going on in the house with my parents, or my mum was, especially when I was really young, often in a state because her brother had tried to commit suicide, and his life was in the balance. And I remember this very, very clearly, right? So my sister and I, even though we were very young, we would talk about this amongst and our limited understanding, right? So I had an ally in a way, right? And to think that to grow up without one must have been quite a solitary experience.
No, that never happened with my brother and I. Like I say, there wasn't really things that were happening that much. My father, I don't know if my father was a drinker, but was an alcoholic, but he was certainly a drinker. But he never drunk at home, or very, very rarely, Christmas Day perhaps. But, the end result was he wasn't home very much as a result. He would come home late. My brother was never my ally, that's for sure. So there was one time when my mum was ill. I can't remember what was wrong with her, but she wasn't able to do the housework. My mum was was a housewife, at the time. And my father went to work, and my mother looked after the house and the children when we were little. My dad had to do the cooking as a result, and he burnt these sausages. He was grilling these sausages, and he burnt them, put them onto the plate. And my brother said, they're burned, and my father lost his temper and stuff, which, like I say, didn't happen very often. I was always really wary of my, father. It was like I say, nothing ever happened, but I always had this sense that he was like, he could go off at any time.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking at the time, what are you doing? Why are you saying that? Don't you realise, that it's going to sort of cause a reaction? Yeah. And he obviously didn't, And it's one of the results, I think, of it is it's made me very sensitive to other people and their moods and stuff like that, and what's going on, or, what they're not saying. But the other aspect of it is sometimes I can just read stuff into things and it's not there, I don't know whether I'm being sensitive and when I'm reading things into something that's not there, 'Cause
it must have influenced you a great deal, though, because, I'm not entirely sure of the quote, but I think it was Jung who said that the psychotherapist who said that it is the unlived life of the parent that sort of weighs heavily on the children, right? And that sort of rules the atmosphere of the household. I'm very grossly paraphrasing, of course, but so this must have been really, really relevant for you and prevalent.
Yes, yeah, it was. One of the ways my mother responded was, she was very much acting as a martyr, and so there was always this sense of expectation, and stuff like that. And my father was, he wasn't there a lot of the time, and when he was, he had quite a veneer of sort of cynicism and detachment and stuff. And I would look up at that, and I sort of like admired him really at the time. Actually, I think he was quite lonely. But
sounds like you were also quite.
Yeah. Well, I know certainly since anyway. But the other side of it is nothing. There was no violence. There was very, very rarely raised voices. There was never anything, sort of any drama that was, over the top or anything like that at all. It was it was weird,
Yeah. Coming from an Italian household, for me, that is exact opposite.
Yes, it was very English.
Yeah.
The guy, when I went into treatment, and the guy used to say about some people, it's no wonder you've turned into an alcoholic, because of the way your life has been. It's no wonder you've turned into an alcoholic, because of the way your life has been.
Question 2, which is, what did the moment you first got hooked, the fun times, what did that look like? So here you are, you're coming from this, if you don't mind me saying so, quite repressed household. You're somewhat isolated, I suppose, and certainly emotionally, right? And at some point, you've got the ism, as you said, right? And for those listeners who may not be super familiar with this, is this what we in the rooms generally describe as the interior condition that, remains when you remove the alcohol or the drugs or whatever it is, the thing that makes you become that, right? The ism, the alcoholism. And how did that manifest, and how did you then first come upon alcohol or drugs?
Firstly, I got, the internal spiritual malady, the ism, one of the time, by the time, I first time I took anything that really made a difference to me, it was LSD when I was 15 years old. And I had gone out of my way to meet this group of people who, I knew took drugs, who had some sort of alternative lifestyle. And we're talking about, the early 70s, it didn't just happen by accident. I deliberately went out of my way. I knew somebody vaguely at school who was part of this group, who wasn't particularly my friend or anything like that, was a year older than me. But I got talking to him, and I got him to take me down to the park, the local park. And there was that. I mean, there was all the glamour and the danger, and the doing something different, the rebelliousness. All of that was very attractive. I think the drugs was part of that, really. More than anything else. I don't think it was particularly the drugs themselves, but it was the drugs were part of that. You couldn't have one without the other. But I was quite keen to try them as well. And not just dope. I wasn't interested in alcohol in the same way because of my father's drinking. And the thing for me was, drinking used to make the way I perceived it. I used to judge my father as being very slobbish when he was drunk. So he'd come home and he'd fall asleep and snore and all that sort of thing. And I was convinced I would have more style than that and stuff.
Yeah, there's that sort of rebellion, isn't it?
Yeah, there's an arrogance and a sort of superiority in there as well. Which I had. That was part of my growing up in that family. Somehow I was superior to everybody else in it. But I think that was internal. I think that was the internal spiritual malady again. I think it was just my defense mechanism. And I took some LSD one night, half a tab of, quite weak acid, but it made a big difference to me, One way I describe it is that, it gave me something that I didn't even know I was looking for. It did seem to give me some sort of extra meaning or something like that, With drugs generally, I sort of, I think of people who take types of drugs, drugs as two types, There's people who are trying to escape from things, and they tend to go for sort of heroin, downers, that sort of thing, And there are people who are looking for something, looking for meaning, And I'm definitely the second type.
So am I, actually.
Like stimulants and stuff, And I've taken heroin, I've injected heroin, but, and I just sit around waiting for it, thinking, when's it going to start working, When am I going to get a really big buzz out of this, and lose myself, and it doesn't happen. So anyway, so I took this tab of acid. One of the things I remember, I was still only 15 years old, and like I said, it was quite an old-fashioned home in some respects. So I had to be home by 10 o'clock, 10:30 or something like that.
Oh, no.
So I remember waiting for the bus, and just sitting on this bench waiting for the bus, and just starting to laugh hysterically, really in hysterics. And as it was happening, I remember looking at there was a part of me that was looking at myself saying, what are you laughing at? It wasn't that something had happened that had made me laugh. It was like, what are you laughing at? And I just couldn't answer it. And the way I understand, possibly now, is that, as we grow up, we get twisted, and we have a load of, in our spirit, really, we have internal tensions, and we're like a rope that's been twisted and twisted and twisted. And it's like, when I took this LSD, it's like, the rope was let go with the weight at the bottom, and it all started unraveling.
Yeah.
And that unraveling was just coming out as this laughter, For the first time, not the first time, it wasn't the only time, but the first time, I remember thinking, it's not then, but a little later on, thinking, it doesn't matter what the consequences are, if I can feel like this, it's worth it, And I had no idea, 15, I had no idea what consequences could be, and I had, similar things, certainly one at the time with LSD.
So was that your first drug of choice, LSD?
I don't know, to be honest with you. It was more what was. There wasn't lots of it around, and it was more what I could get and stuff like that. Yes, but I was always a bit nervous about it at the same time. I think I was a bit wary about. I was never quite sure I could handle it and stuff like that. So there was that aspect of it.
But there were no consequences at that time, clearly.
I think, but it was actually, yeah. I think I got a bit sort of muddled in my head, really. And not exactly. And as a result, I stepped, or in some way, I stepped back from that scene a little bit and stuff. I went up and started taking my A-levels, And I got in with a group of lads who were a bit older, who were drinking, and it was just that was a bit more just normal sort of 17, 18-year-old stuff like that, See, I mean, that's the thing about, the question, remind me of the question again.
The question is, what did the moment you first got hooked, what did the fun times?
Yeah, that thing about, what exactly is being hooked? Because, that made a difference. And there was always, what I learned from that was, drugs will make a difference. Drugs will give me something that I can't get for myself. I went up to university, and I just relate it to that first bit of the Bill's story. I was 18 years old. I was away from home. He was in moments, intervals hilarious, moments sublime. It was and that was just mainly smoking dope and stuff. But just that thing of being part of it. Being part of a group, and that was and that was actually one of the there's not been many times in my life when I've been happy, but I was then, because I was just, I felt part, like you said, detachment has been so much part of my illness. And yet for all that, yes, it was with taking drugs and everything, but at the time, it's sort of, I was part of that group,
Did you feel you'd arrived in one way or another?
Yeah, not in the way he meant in terms of sort of being a success, but just, just feeling like, just feeling part of something, part of a group, part of university, all that sort of stuff,
So here you are, you're at uni, how old are you now? 18, 19?
18, 19, yeah.
It sounds like you were having a good time. It also, so far, doesn't sound like drugs or alcohol were a problem, or had apart from the acid, maybe had like a really big impact on you. Were you drinking often? Were you drinking daily? Were you already drinking alcoholically? Were you taking drugs like an addict, or not yet?
Yeah, like I say, so, when I first started, with that group in the park, when I was 15, 15 into my 16th year, I think, that probably lasted for a few months, and, it was affecting me in some way, smoking and taking drugs, taking LSD and, what was it, speed of different sorts, You used to get these things called Benzodrine inhalers. You used to be able to get them from the chemist, and you smash them and you drank them, you put them in tea and drank them, and they were full of Benzodrine, you'd be completely off your head. But it was having an effect, and like I say, in some way I stepped back from that. I think probably more than anything else because I was really determined to get away from home, and the easiest way to do that without causing a fuss would have been to go to university, and I think it was about sort of focusing on that. I think that was one, I think that was going on certainly a little bit later on.
So there was some awareness there that this could be a potential danger. And with you wanting to get away, knowing that university was the way to do it, you preferred to step away.
I don't think it was as clear thinking as that.
No.
Yeah.
Some awareness, perhaps.
Yeah. As I took my A-levels, I tended to mix more with this group that were drinking more. Just circumstances and money and everything were limiting factors. But there was I'd always be the one who would get a little bit more out of it. Usually for me as well, it would lead to some sort of depression, or self-pity or, that sort of thing,
Okay.
I'd be the one who'd be moping around in the corner, sort of feeling sorry for himself and cry and stuff like that, which didn't go down, this group of guys were like quite merciless about that sort of stuff, take the piss and everything,
Yeah.
And, when I was at university, that said, the like you said, the feeling that I'd arrived, the positive aspect of it, was, you spoke about that loneliness and solitude at the beginning. That was one of the few times when that was broken.
Yeah.
And I did feel part of a group. Actually, one of the reasons I felt part of the group was because I was quite a dominant personality in the group. And it was, I think, always the potential to take too many drugs was in me.
How did it progress from there? So you're at uni, and it sounds like you were mostly having a good time. How did it go from there?
It was always a balancing act in those times. The things I'm supposed to do, go to university, even before that, get my A-levels, but like I say, I had a really vested interest in that in terms of getting away from home. But going to university, getting my degree, getting a job, which I did all those things, getting a job where I was using my degree. I ended up working in South London for a housing association. But there was always times when I would, be taking lots and lots of drugs, first of all, lots and lots of drugs, and always wanting to take more and more, And I suppose the third strand in that is like that the emotional sort of like immaturity, neediness, never being able to sort of, never really having a proper girlfriend, even at that age, having quite sort of codependent relationships with women, falling in love with women who were sort of emotionally unavailable, or at least to me they were. Basically just, I just wasn't the person for them. Somebody didn't like me, there's a good chance I'd fall in love with them. Or no, actually, no, they didn't like me, but if somebody didn't feel like that towards me, that would sort of like trigger me, So that aspect of things as well, and using drugs to escape, So there's times when I went on this real binge for 2 or 3 weeks on barbiturates, which are really strong and capacitating.
Aren't they sort of like the tranquilizers?
They're sort of like downers, yeah. But they have they're more than, they have a different effect. I don't really know myself, but they're not just like Valium and stuff, They have a different effect on the brain.
Very old tranquilizer of sorts.
You don't get them anymore. They don't make them anymore. No. They were like really a sort of 70s drug basically.
Yeah.
People and 60s. Marilyn Monroe died. And barbiturates and stuff.
Yeah. So you went on this 2-3 week bender.
Just there was stuff going on with this woman, and it was just a way of running away from myself, a way of getting people's sympathy, a way of trying to get her to come and rescue me, all that sort of stuff. God, I haven't thought about this for years. I was at university, my second year, I just took loads and loads of drugs. And I was just really lucky to get through. The third year, I was going to make sure that at least I could get, I wasn't going to end up in that position where I had to do tons and tons of work in the last 2 weeks or something like that. And then I got this job in London. By the time I moved down to London, I'd moved away from the people I could score drugs from, and I couldn't make friends, and I couldn't, I was very lonely. I couldn't talk, I'd go out on a Friday night with this idea of, go out to some of the music venues in London with this idea of chatting up a woman, and I just kept more and more drunk, and eventually my drinking escalated, So my first detox was, I think it was 1983, so I'd have been about 26, 27.
So at 27, you're in your first detox, and clearly the first consequences had arrived. It was the end of the fun times.
I think the fun times have ended quite a long time. I don't think I had many fun, just fun in inverted commas. But yeah.
How did you have any awareness? I mean, obviously you had some awareness around it, otherwise you wouldn't have been in the detox. But how did you view this at the time? Did you think, I've just gone overboard a bit and I'm just going to rein this in a little bit and then I'll...
No. I mean, I knew, it was alcohol, I knew nothing about alcoholism. I knew I was drinking too much. I'd tried to stop. I'd gone to the doctors. I'd tried to cut down, all that sort of stuff, And eventually I had a sort of like a breakdown, sort of like an alcoholic stroke nervous breakdown. And I was in that position where I was in my flat. I would wake up, I would start drinking. I had a job, but I stopped going to it, I would wake up, I'd start drinking, when till I fell asleep. When I fell asleep, I'd have a bottle next to me. And when I woke up, I'd start drinking again, The only time I went out really was to buy more alcohol from the off licence, which was across the road. That went on for 2 or 3 weeks, And eventually I ended up having to come back to my parents in Hertfordshire. I was living in London. And I went to, the detox in the psychiatric hospital, and it was like, a real old school Victorian psychiatric hospital, so that the people there were very ill, I knew nothing. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why I couldn't stop drinking. Didn't know why I was shaking. I hadn't eaten for 2 or 3 weeks, I was in a real state. I came in and I knew nothing about alcoholism. I knew by then, not that I was how I would have put it, but I knew that once I started, I couldn't stop. For me, more than anything else, it was really, really uncool. That was the biggest thing. This psychiatric hospital. It was, as far as I was concerned, it was the local loony bin where we used to, that we used to make fun of people. When I was at school. And suddenly, I'm in there. I'm in there desperate. So it was a real sense of failure. But I moved back to London, and I got, that the place where I worked, it was very supportive. But my attitude was that, I had lost all credibility by this happening to me. No, it never happened to anybody else I knew. Nobody else I knew was an alcoholic. Nobody else I knew had gone to hospital for a detox. Nobody else I knew had been in a psychiatric hospital. So, it was just really uncool. The only way I could get back any credibility was to build up my life again.
Question 3 is, what were your worst consequences and finally your rock bottom, if there was such a thing for you?
I mean, my worst consequence, just in terms of what happened, was that, going to prison.
Right, okay. Is this fast forwarding quite a bit?
Yeah.
Let's go there.
So, not after psychiatric hospital, it was another 7 or 8 years, but eventually I ended up in a treatment centre down in Weston-super-Mare. I came out of there, and was part of AA and had 20 years clean time.
Wow.
And then relapsed. What they say about relapsing, that you start off where you left off.
Yes.
Was really true for me. So, we haven't covered this part of the story, but, in my late 20s, early 30s, I was running around London trying to score £10 bags of amphetamine when I could, when the dole check had come in, and injecting it. So I was 55 years old, I had tens of thousands of pounds in the bank, and suddenly I was running around, scoring £500-600 worth of cocaine and injecting it instead. I really did go right back.
How did you progress, this a little bit in brackets, from being the alcoholic from the local loony bin, I think is what you said, right, to being the guy who injects cocaine?
Well, in the time leading up to that, going to psychiatric hospital, that first detox, I'm that thing about the reading, substitute one drug for another, and eventually, that's me.
Okay.
I have jumped from drugs to alcohol to drugs to different drugs to other drugs. That's all. Like I say, barbiturates, amphetamines. I started injecting when I was at university. That's when I first started. By the time when I was in once I was in London and eventually I'd lost that job that I was talking about, and I dropped out. And I was just signing on and scoring, basically. That was my life. About 6 or 7 years, something like that, But, again, there was another change, from drugs to alcohol again. But,
So you flip-flopped quite.
Yeah, I always loved injecting, the whole paraphernalia of it, You hear people, ritual is the word I would use.
Ritual, yes, absolutely. All right.
That whole thing about people who have, needle addictions, that's me.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on that a bit for those people who haven't heard this?
I could go poetic. Yeah.
What is needle addiction?
That like a fetish, a sexual fetish, is such that unless you have it in some way, you can't achieve sexual satisfaction.
Yes,
whatever it is, black shoes, whips, whatever your thing is. Yeah,
we're an open podcast here, no judgment. Yeah,
a needle fetish is if I have a drug. If I can't inject it, it's not, it's only 50% of the drug.
Right, okay. So snorting a line is not going to...
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, sure.
Nothing.
Right.
Absolutely nothing. Yeah.
I think that would have brought me down to my knees in much less than 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
The progression that you experienced, and talking about worst consequences in question 3 and finally your rock bottom, was it linear or was it up and down, back and forth, so to speak?
Well, with my story, because of that, because especially with that relapse, it was up and down. It was alcohol that brought me to my knees.
And then you came to
absolutely AA. Brought me to my knees, and that brought me to AA, and it took me into treatment. And when I came out of treatment, I went to AA, and I mean, I don't know if rock bottom is quite the right word I would use, but, there was a point of surrender.
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
So you found your way into the rooms of...
Well, I'd known about AA from a couple of times when I'd been in hospital, in psychiatric. I'd been in and out of psychiatric hospital a few times, treatments, programs and detoxes since then. And a couple of times I'd come into contact with AA. I'd already tried to get back into psychiatric hospital and they wouldn't have me. Why do people come to 12-step fellowships? There's three reasons, I think. One is because it's free. Mm-hmm. Two is because it's there. It's always there. You can always find a meeting. And the third is that deep down inside, we know that, it's a spiritual problem that needs a spiritual solution,
Mm-hmm.
For me, I had nowhere else. That morning when I woke up and I just knew I had to do something. I phoned up the AA helpline and they told me about a meeting that evening and I went to that meeting. That was the first time I voluntarily... I'd been to probably 2 or 3 meetings before, but it was only because people had made me go. It was in hospital. That was the first time that I went by myself.
And you were you just said earlier that you were clean for 20 years.
That was following on
from there.
Yeah.
So it's an up and down story in many ways. And
my second, if you like, my second point of surrender was in prison. Let me just, sorry to interrupt you there, but let me just very gently roll this back a little bit. That's a big deal, isn't it? I mean, you were clean for 20 years, a good, long-standing member of the fellowship, right? Yeah. I'm sure that in 20 years, it's an enormous amount of time, you must have had sponsees, you were sponsoring, and oh, you weren't? No.
Right, okay.
Because I always had that thing, keeping the distance.
Right, so you were keeping your distance in AA as well.
I'm keeping, it was more about the personal distance, there was a limit to how close I could get to people.
Right.
Because I hadn't addressed that spiritual malady.
Right, okay, but you were still clean for 20 years.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Okay. And I'm assuming that this was also part of the reason why you ended up relapsing. The fact that you had not addressed, as you were just saying, that you had not addressed the spiritual malady aspect of you. But that's still a really long time to be clean for someone who had, quite a problem. So some things were working, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is, I was in treatment for a long time. I went to this was the early 90s. I went to this treatment centre down in Weston-super-Mare. In those days, treatment centres weren't regulated. So this guy who ran it he was a madman. He would be shouting at people. He terrified me. One of the reasons I got sober was because I was frightened of him. Not the only reason, but it was one of the reasons. And to some extent, it was what I needed to spur myself. But it was a really tough place. Yeah, people were shouting at each other left, right, and centre. It was really confrontational. It was encouraged. You're encouraged to do it. When it happened, you were encouraged to sort of, stand your ground, and there's no safeguarding at all. What the idea of safeguarding was, that was a word that people hadn't even heard of in those days. I was there for 13 months. Yeah.
Wow.
It was a long-term treatment centre, and it did me a lot of good. But I came out. It was so tough that it was almost like I thought, anything that I have to do in the steps is going to be easy, so I don't have to really do them so much, I sort of did do steps 1, 2, and 3 there, and it wasn't that we didn't look at the steps, but it wasn't 12-step it wasn't 12-step related.
But when you were in AA for 20 years and you were clean for 20 years, I'm assuming you did quite a few meetings and so on and so forth. Did you would you looking back? Well, I'm pushing the boat out a bit just here, but did you feel were you hiding a bit in AA?
Oh. Yeah. Yes, I was. Yeah, I guess. What happened in the end, I came out of there. I did steps 4 and 5. I did do the step 4 and 5 as well as I was able with somebody, who was like, but that's as far as it went. I never got a sponsor. Steps 6 and 7 were just about trying to be a better person. Say, please, I'd do my own, I'd sponsor myself basically. Say please and thank you and try and be a bit nicer to my mum.
Yeah. Yeah.
Steps 8 and 9 was about, I said sorry to some of the people that I felt I needed to, And steps 10, 11 and 12 were about, more than anything else, just about still being involved in the fellowship, I suppose. I did a lot of service.
Right.
But the reason I did service was, to make me look good, Like I say, I never sponsored anybody. Nobody even asked me to sponsor them, because, there was always that element of keeping people at a distance. And, I think probably there's an element of people realise that, in the end, I was a bit of a fraud,
It's quite a statement there.
Yeah. The first time I said it was really difficult. Like I say, I was doing this stuff to build myself up, and my life had changed completely, I'd been a junkie who'd been running around London trying to score £10 bags. I went back to college. I became a teacher. I got a job. I got a better job. I started to, I started to build up all the, I'm not particularly, even then I wasn't particularly materialistic. I needed like the recognition and the affirmation and all that sort of stuff, I needed the acclaim. I did need that. But I didn't need to have like, super sports cars or, anything. I just had a flat, I had a car, and in a sense, I thought that was having a spiritual awakening, but all that had happened is I'd become more competent.
Yes.
Because I am completely, I don't know, I'm sure it's true to all of us, but the difference between me when I'm using and me when I'm not it's just unrecognisable. And there has never been any middle ground.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that is true for all of us, but it's true for you.
So when I relapsed after 20 years, like I say, there's a bit of a story about it. It was a stop-start type thing. But once I really started, it was half-term holiday. I'd scored all this cocaine. And before the end of the week, I was injecting.
Wow. So after 20 years, right, I'm assuming the cocaine that you scored didn't just show up in your hand out of nowhere. So how did it get to that? How...
Another aspect of, obviously, I wasn't spiritually fit.
Yeah.
During those 20 years, I had sex addiction. And I wouldn't have called it, well, a lot of the time I didn't call it that, I was acting out with escorts on a really regular basis.
Right, okay, yeah.
There was, I eventually ended up with one of the women that I saw, I got emotionally entangled with as well.
With this escort?
Yeah, that's right, There were lots of things going on there, I thought I was going to rescue her, because there was other things going on in her life, and stuff like that. And there was lots of stuff about her that I was incredibly attracted to her, physically, obviously.
Yeah.
She was another one of these girls who was like, she liked me, but she wasn't going to get emotionally involved with me.
Is this part of sex addiction, choosing potential partners who are unavailable?
I think that's the love addiction,
right.
But the sex addiction is just about the sex. The way I see it, I was spending money I didn't have, doing something I didn't want to do, and feeling shit about myself afterwards. Whether that's taking speed, taking cocaine, or seeing escorts.
Yes.
It's addiction.
Yeah, of course.
And I was aware of that, I managed to manage it in a way, at times when I engaged in quite risky behaviour, more in terms of sort of like, I don't mean about the sex, but, places I was going, some of the people I was mixing with, picking people up off the streets and things like that, And I stopped that sort of, I started to sort of stop that.
This is while you were living an outwardly respectable life with the flat and the car and the job.
I had a compartmentalised life.
Right.
I had my program, my AA life. I had my work life.
Yes.
I had my people I used to go to the football with.
Yeah.
I had my sex life.
Yeah.
I had, I eventually got a girlfriend. That was another compartment. I had my sports life, my running and cycling life.
Right.
They were really compartmentalised.
So you are, how old are you here at this point?
This was through my 40s, into my 50s.
Into your 50s, okay.
Yeah.
So you're a outwardly respectable member of AA. You describe yourself as an alcoholic. At the same time, you're not really sponsoring, you're not addressing the spiritual malady that we all suffer from, You have the flat, you have the car, and so on and so forth, but you're also clearly suffering on a different level, really, right? And that remains unaddressed.
Yeah. There was a time when I used to feel guilty about the things that I used to do.
Right.
You know, when it first started up and as it carried on, I used to feel guilty about it. And I started going to Sex Addicts Anonymous.
Right.
I ended up having psychotherapy around some of the behaviours, you know. And what it did in a way, you know, it was really dangerous. Well, it was, obviously. You know, the way I see it is that while I was feeling guilty for all that it was a mess, I was still trying to make spiritual progress. I was still trying to, I knew I wasn't right and I knew I needed to do something. You know, I wasn't prepared to address it properly and stuff like that. Perhaps I didn't know, you know, that's a long story, you know, that's debatable. But what all that stuff did in the end was it made me, you know, plus, you know, like I said, I moderated my behaviour. It became a lot less risky. You know, financially, it became more, you know, I had more money. So that, you know, it became manageable. Yeah. You know, a phrase I've heard is, you know, I was managing the unmanageable. You know, so I thought I was all right.
Yeah.
You know,
but then you weren't.
And then I met this woman, and that, you know, that
another escort.
This woman that I was buying cocaine. Yeah, this other woman that I became emotionally entangled with. You know, she's the first person I've become properly, you know, entangled, whatever the word is, you know. There were some very genuine feelings there, you know, but there was an awful lot of mess going on, you know, particularly on my side. I was buying her cocaine, have sex with, you know, we'd stay up and have sex and stuff like that, you know.
But you weren't taking any?
I wasn't taking any of it, no. The story around that, you know, there was one time, it wasn't actually with cocaine, it was with dope. She was, you know, the first time she was smoking dope with me. And I really, really wanted to have a puff, you know. And dope wasn't, you know, it'd been a long, long time since I'd taken dope, and it'd been even longer since I'd have enjoyed it or got off on it, you know. Yeah. It wasn't anything, but, you know, it was just about being with her, you know. I really wanted to take it with her, and I didn't. And I remember waking up the next morning thinking, you know, thank God I didn't do that, you know. And I thought I'd fought that battle and that I'd won that battle. You know, and just because I'd won it one night, you know, I became cocky, and, you know, I'll always, of course, it never occurred to me, you know, not really. Later on down the line, I was buying her cocaine at times, and there was this one night, you know, it was a bit of a sort of, you know, we were going to spend the night together, which didn't happen very often, you know. Quite usually she would go, which was important to me at the time. And I just said, out of the blue, I'll have a line. And she, you know, she gave me the mirror. You know, I made the line out, you know, as though it hadn't been 20 years, that had been 20 minutes since I'd last had a line of cocaine, you know. I had this sweep where you know, the grains go out on the mirror. I didn't think about it, you know, and whatever thoughts I did have, I just bashed them behind. You know, I wasn't prepared to even entertain the thoughts that this might be a mistake, you know. And it wasn't about the cocaine, it was about her, you know. But what happened, you know, I don't know when, but, you know, I can't say like the next minute. I can't even say like the next half hour. But, you know, at some point very soon, I was thinking, where's the next line of cocaine coming from? That was about midnight that happened, 12:30. By 4 or 5 o'clock, we were starting to run out of cocaine. And all I could think, you know, the obsession and the allergy were on me. You know, I hadn't used for 20 years. I'd been using for 4 hours. And they were right on me again, you know. Where are we going to get some more cocaine? It was New Year's Day, you know, 5 o'clock on New Year's Day. So, you know, the dealer had gone to sleep, you know. How were we going to manage to Kevin to survive? We made these, you know, it's a funny story in a way, but we made these two lines. You know, one was small, one was big. And you can guess which line I had. 4 hours before I'd done anything for this woman, you know, I wasn't giving her the big line of cocaine. No. You know. No. And very quickly, the whatever sex and love addiction I had towards that woman was quickly overpowered by cocaine addiction. Yeah.
And so by the end of that week, you said you were injecting?
No, I had a stop-start. So
I see, okay.
I had a 3-day binge, and I stopped. You know, I had to go back to work, and I spent the whole, you know, I did a lot of things to try. I knew I'd made a mistake. Yeah, I knew that I'd fucked up. I told my sponsor that I'd taken the cocaine. I told this woman that that it was a mistake and that I couldn't do it again. Some other things, I can't remember exactly what I did, I wasn't prepared to go to any lengths. What were any lengths? What could I have done? I could have stopped seeing her, which was never going to happen, but I could have done. I could have gone to the AA meeting where I was secretary and say, look, I've used cocaine, I need to give up this position. I knew there was CA meetings in. I didn't know there were CA meetings because I needed them, but I knew that, I knew somebody who went to CA meetings. I need to go to the CA meeting.
You could have been honest.
That's what I mean about going to the meeting. That's what I couldn't do. I had too much false pride to go to that meeting and say, look, I've used it again. There was some sort of vague justification in terms of, it was cocaine and not alcohol, but, I didn't really buy that myself, Most importantly, when it came to half term, I could have got in my car and I could have driven up to my sponsor's house, up north, and we could have gone through the 12 steps again. Instead, what I did was I bought £500 of cocaine that weekend and spent the weekend with that woman, and I never stopped. 7 weeks later, so the beginning of February, I was the acting deputy head of one of the main best primary schools. 7 weeks later, the middle of April, I was in prison. And like I say, it wasn't just for smashing a window or something like that. I committed a serious crime. I didn't get out of prison for 4.5 years. And I lost everything. That's not quite true, but when I was in prison, everything had gone, that's for sure, And not a lot of those things didn't come back.
I mean, you certainly lost your freedom for 4.5 years.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's not little.
Yeah.
To state the obvious. Yeah. Would this then be your rock bottom if we return to question 3?
No. While I was there, what was I thinking of? All I was thinking, I need some more cocaine.
In prison?
Yeah, and I couldn't get any and, stuff. And, eventually I managed to get hold of a line of cocaine and I did this line in prison, took it. I had to take it in, my cellmate was this old guy, even older guy than me, I had to take it in secret away from him,
It's not so easy in a prison cell.
No. But, he's just on the top bunk and I'm underneath and he's not coming down, I think the second time, there was 2 lines. The second time I went into the toilet in a corner that's got a metal screen around it. So you just bend down, so it wasn't no glamour. I took this line and the lights got brighter. My skin tingled. I felt my heart get beat up, I sat up. I hadn't used for 4 months. The way I describe it now is I got the effect, it was cocaine, however weak, I don't know. But I got no escape at all. I just looked around me and I was still in this prison cell with this guy, with the bars on the window, toilet in the corner, no prospect to getting out. And I just had this thought that, whatever I thought alcohol and drugs were going to give me, excitement, happiness, notoriety, women, whatever it was, it was a lie.
That realization there.
And that's step 1, for me, that is, well, at least it's part of step 1, understanding that I am powerless and that my life is unmanageable.
So my step 1 happened in an A&E of a hospital when I overdosed. And I think that there is certain places that really help you come to that realization just a little bit quicker. And I think hospitals and jail cells are particularly good for it. If you don't mind me asking, you don't have to answer this obviously, but if you don't mind me asking, how did you deal with the fact that all of a sudden you find yourself in a prison cell? I mean, you are a primary school teacher, right? With a somewhat respectable life and so on and so forth. You're also not a young kid anymore that you sort of just end up in prison. Something happens, something goes wrong, that sort of thing, And you're in there for a long time, 4.5 years. How did you deal with this?
I don't, to some extent, I don't know. I guess I had no choice. I was in a really bad state when I got there. I was in the hospital wing for 2 or 3 weeks, while they were detoxing me. I hated it. I hated the lack of freedom. The way that I see it now is that, the first creative thing we do is we live our lives. Forget about writing poetry, whatever. First creative, we have a freedom to live our life the way we want to. And a lot of the time, or at least within restraints, social restraints, and that involves simple things like just, what time do I get up? What work do I do? When do I do my washing? What time am I going to eat? What am I going to, just all those tiny little decisions that make up a day, that you make in a day, that mean that this is my life, and it felt like they were all gone, and a lot of them are gone. You can't go out of the door, you can't decide what time you're going to eat. You can't decide when you're going to do your washing. You can't decide what, all that sort of stuff, I found it incredibly repressive. Dehumanizing was the word I used at the time. The people...
Still use that word today?
I'd have to think about that, to be honest with you. I'm not so sure I would now. That's what it felt like, though, for sure. I remember, we had a debate about it in one of the classes they did. I found the people, because a lot of the people there, were very disorganized, very undisciplined, aggressive, frustrated. Not necessarily towards me so much. I was fairly well, the prison system did protect me, fairly well.
In what way?
I didn't get beaten up. I didn't get threatened, or, I didn't get bullied, stuff like that.
How did the system protect you from those things?
I think it was just the systems they had in place, Okay.
Yeah.
But they were still very difficult to people to be around. People would kick off at the, smallest little things. The sense of shame about everything that had happened was massive, and took an awful lot of coming to terms with. The sense of loss that I had, I'd lost that life that I'd had before. I'd lost my self-respect. I was going to lose my fat. I'd lost my money. I'd lost my job. Like I said to you, all those things that I had that, that I was using to build myself up, the standing I had in AA, the respectable job I had, the way the children looked up at me, the parents, interact, all of that went. So I had an incredible, I just felt completely empty and lost.
Yeah. Question 4 is, did you ever want to die? Did you consider suicide?
Not then. No, I've had a couple of suicide attempts previous to that, but no, they would ask you, are you thinking of suicide in prison? And, and you'd never told them yes, because if you did, they would never leave you alone. They'd be sending psychiatrists to see you all the time. And they thought you were a suicide risk. They would be checking up on you every 15 minutes during the night. So it was always like an option. But I just wanted to know that it was there, but I never really seriously thought about it.
If you don't mind me asking, your previous suicide attempts, were they drug-related?
Alcohol-related.
Alcohol-related.
Yeah. And my thoughts on it, one was just a suicide drama around a relationship, around this other woman that I'd been involved with the alcohol years and years before. And it was, I cut my wrist. I phoned her up and told her what I'd done, but I wasn't going to look stupid. So I did cut myself very badly, I cut an artery and stuff like that, And the thing about that is sort of like, I hear people, the thing I would say about that is, I hear people talk about, I was never courageous, I thought about committing suicide, but I was never courageous enough, That was not my experience. It wasn't about courage. It was about being sick enough, Right. I'd got out of hospital after, I can't remember what had happened. Something had happened with this other woman. I think I'd taken an overdose of pills, and they discharged me. And I was at home. I went back to this flat that I had, and I knew there was bottles of cider there. And I spent about a day and a half drinking myself into a state where I could do that to myself. For me to do that to myself, there's something internal that I have to overcome. And people don't want to hurt themselves, and I had to make myself sick enough that I had to overcome that, and that's what I did.
Question 5, you sort of touched a bit on that, but what other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms?
So that thing, that after that first detox, when I came back to London, I was going to this day centre in Fulham that was called Accept, and it was brilliant. They were really, there was loads of support. They were funded. You could go there and you could do art therapy, and they had groups.
Oh wow!
I know.
Must have been the 90s, surely.
80s,
80s,
yeah.
That kind of funding.
Yeah. They had this hospital site in Fulham. This sort of that old hospital that I used, and I was there for about a month, and then I did night classes, night sessions afterwards when I went back to work, and it was really, really good, and there was a lot of specialist people, and people who gave up a lot of their time, But when I look at it now, they didn't have a program. Basically, you just went there and you talked, and hopefully something worked, and you understood yourself better, and they didn't have a higher power.
Right.
When I'd been asked previously, when I went into that first hot detox hospital, they, that first psychiatric hospital, they asked me, do you want to see AA? The only thing I knew about AA was that I did not want to see them. I couldn't have told you why, but no, I didn't, and then these other people came along who were more sort of like, I don't know.
Isn't it true though that, and I've suffered massively from this prejudice about not wanting to go any A, CA, AA, whatever A. Although I'd never been, ever in the room. I had no real concept of what would have gone on in there. And for some reason, it seemed the uncoolest place to go, right? Yeah. You'd rather go to art therapy or whatever. That would have really appealed to me, actually, at one time or another. Most of my life, you do art therapy, you do all sorts, whatever, and exercise and running and psychotherapy until you drop. But we always say, don't we, that AA or CA is the last house on the block, isn't it? And that's certainly true for me. And I find it so interesting. Why? And there's no answer to this right away, I suppose. But why it is that we have this terrible aversion almost to it, to that which is going to save us later?
I mentioned about how, for me, this is one of the main things at that time was just that I'd somehow, messed up and was so uncool. And to get my own credibility back, I'd made this mess, so I had to get myself out of it, and somehow going to AA was about, I suppose going further down in a way. It was even worse than being in psychiatric hospital. Not that I knew anything about it. Whereas going to this other place was in some way sort of like, self-help or something. It was enabling me.
Interesting stuff.
That period of clean time lasted approximately a year. And then, like I said, I started using speed, still working. And within 3 months, I'd lost my job. I was lucky I didn't get arrested for stealing from where I worked. I'd stolen money. And I dropped out, And there was a part, I said about that balancing act, I was whatever age I was. And finally, I was like, I'm not going to go to work. I can sign on. I can get my checks, I can spend them on drugs, and nobody can complain. I don't have to meet anybody's expectations.
Question 6 is, did you struggle with the word God? Now, you've had more than one bout in AA and CA. You've been to Sex Addicts Anonymous, sorry. Did you struggle with the word God when you came in?
I go back to that first meeting that I told you about that I went to voluntarily. And I don't even remember God being mentioned or not mentioned, to be honest. So no, I didn't struggle with it. I was brought up Catholic, and there was always like, I'd rejected my religion at 16 or so, but that sort of influence of a spiritual life, of some sort of spiritual dimension to life, was always there for me, I think. people were kind to me when I came to that meeting, and they accepted me, and they encouraged me to keep coming back. They helped me keep coming back, because they used to come and, I was living that. I wasn't living in it wasn't easy to get to. I wasn't within walking distance or public transport of meetings. And if God was part of that, there were lots of things that I suppose in a sense there's a lot of things that I could have struggled with, but just the fact that I'd found somewhere where I could go, was something, and I wasn't really too fussed about what it was. I didn't get to the stage where I examined it. By the time I did sort of become aware of it, it had become part of the landscape anyway. So I did.
So you do not belong to the group of people like myself who were kept out by this, or who felt that there was a barrier there that needed overcoming in any which way.
Yeah.
Question 7 is, how do you experience your higher power today, your God moment?
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
I think there's an element of, that God is always there in the everyday. But that means I have to put quite a lot of effort into having those periods where I'm focusing on him, I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. The first prayer I make is I get down on my knees and I ask God to keep me away from a drug and a drink and other types of addictive behaviour just for today. I do that nearly every single day. I did that this morning. And then I probably have a couple of hours where, I'm getting myself ready, I'm spending time, what does it say in step 11, conscious contact, with God. Some of it I do through set, because I've gone back to the Catholic Church, so I do set prayers from the church. I do my own sort of private prayers. Mm-hmm. I go and have a shave, and then I come back, and then I do some more readings, the mass readings for the day. Like I've said to you, I do this two-way prayer with somebody else now on a regular basis. And that's been really, since September, going through a period of things where I've been really focusing on my spiritual presence, Spiritual growth isn't the right word, but, I've been focused on improving my conscious contact with God as I understand him. I've been doing this thing called a retreat in the real world, which is sort of like a spiritual retreat, based on spiritual exercises of the Jesuits. I've been doing this two-way prayer. I did this 5-week course on literature and theology, and all of those things seem to have come together and really given me a real sort of sense of sort of, spiritual peace, I guess, And that's, been the bedrock. I've got an awful lot out of it for a long time, and it is changing, I love when you're in a live CAA meeting, and before the meeting starts and everybody's chatting and there is that buzz in a room, and that is our higher power at work in those meetings, and then somebody has to ring the bell because welcome to the Monday lunchtime meeting of Cocaine Anonymous,
Yeah.
But that buzz beforehand, I love that. I think that's something to do with a higher power. There are times when I just, that times are usually through the church, to be honest, usually through in communion. I've had 3 or 4 times when I felt so glad that God is right next to me. It's not just about a feeling, actually, because, feelings come and go. I think people put too much weight on feelings, but just that real sense of like my higher power as I understand him, is there with me, and it's usually been through the Eucharist,
right,
in some ways or another, which is, that's just how it's been, I can't deny that.
No. But I also hear that, perhaps for want of a better expression, you work quite hard for it. That's 2 hours in the morning where, you seek higher power, right? And I know that the book says God would and could if he was sought, which of course implies very much that we seek our higher power. And I hear a lot of seeking.
And there's that point as well in chapter 4, the book. I meant to bring my book with me, actually. But, where it says God either is or he isn't.
Yes.
And it's, what is our choice to be? And it is a choice.
Yeah, it is a choice.
And it is about, doing that. I go to mass 3 or 4 times a week. I go to meetings 6 or 7 times a week. I read. I've got 2 books on the go at the moment that are based around sort of spiritual activities in one way or another.
As part of your Step 11.
Yeah. I mean, they're not 12-step books, but
Well, they don't necessarily have to be, I suppose, in that way. I think sort of improving your conscious contact with God as you understand.
People have just got different.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Which brings me to question 8, which is, which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you?
It's when you come in the second time, you know what you're letting yourself in for. So it's not quite the same. The first time I didn't, in a sense, I didn't do them, so it was difficult, So the first time, I guess the thing that I didn't do that would have made a difference would have been getting a sponsor.
Yeah.
So where does that come into the steps? I suppose it's really around step 2, isn't it, more than anything else? For me now, I guess in a way, the thing that I still sort of question the most is step 9. Because my life, because of that detachment that I spoke about before, I've moved on. I just drop everything and move on. Yeah. And that's happened a number of times in my life.
So for those listeners who are not familiar with step 9 quite yet, it's the part of the steps where we go out and we make amends to those people we've hurt during our drinking and using or other behaviors.
Yeah. By direct amends for those people we've
indeed
hurt. And they're just, they've gone. Yes. There's a whole load of women, and it's not a cop out. For me to turn up on their doorstep and begin to start talking about having had a spiritual awakening, or whatever, I think it would do more harm than good.
Yeah, and it's a fine line to walk, and one that needs walking with a sponsor for sure.
All my family, all my close family are no longer alive.
Right.
The people that were directly infected. So I haven't made, and a lot of, some of the other amends, which, those things about whether I should go and make amends to people I shoplifted from, sort of, and also again my age, we're talking about 40 years ago or something,
Yeah.
So in a lot of respects, I haven't made a lot of direct amends, and I sometimes question myself: have I done it properly?
Yeah.
But I look at my lists and I go through it, and I speak to my sponsor and he tells me I have, and
it's not always a straightforward process. Absolutely.
And there's one or two there's one financial amends that I'm just not able to make because of fear, whatever it is. It's such a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I just can't do it. At the moment.
Yeah.
And I try and make, what's the word, gestures, I guess.
Yeah.
Towards it as a result. But it's it's a big can of worms if I was to start to open it up. There's an area around women. There's one woman that if I was to run into, then I would, and I might do. She lives relatively locally. There's something around work. If I was to get in touch, I was able to contact this person. There's something around my family, a distant uncle. And, in a sense, if those sort of opportunities were to arise, and those 3 I would follow through. And in a sense, they would cover those areas of my life. But they haven't, a couple of times they seem to have perhaps, but then, then I think they did, I was in touch with my uncle, but nothing came of it, so.
Question 9, which character defects give you most trouble?
Right, I should have prepared this question, didn't I? I remember thinking of that. God.
I think a spontaneous response is probably as good as.
I still want adulation. I still want recognition. I still worry about what people think of me. I don't want to, there's still that part of me, which means that I have to work, I'm continually working on humility. It's not so much I don't know, maybe I do want to run the show, but it is about, wanting to be sort of the most important person in the meeting, wanting people to defer to me, wanting people to, look, come and ask me for advice, or wanting to be able to give other people advice, all of that sort of stuff, So looking for that outside recognition. That comes around women as well, and wanting sort of women's, not necessarily relationships, but wanting sort of like, to be in some way have a special place in them and stuff like that, you know. Amazingly, given my background, you know, not that I don't have sort of sexual, you know, lust and stuff, but it's something that I've managed to put in its place now, you know.
To a healthy place.
Yeah, you know, it's another addiction, you know. It's like the drugs. It's never going to give me what I want. So, you know, it's a mistake to try and, you know, look for it, you know. But that's supposed to, so that main thing is around sort of like superior, you know. It's what, you know, I suppose that, you know, when we do step 6 and 7, you know, we do step 5, because we don't know ourselves, we do step 5 and we don't get to know ourselves. Nobody can know themselves, but we get to know what I'm like. I get to know what I'm like. And the way I did it in terms of, you know, what am I like? Inside, there's this part of me that in some way thinks that I am faulty and that, you know, I'm always going to mess up whatever. And so what do I do to build, like, you know, my defences, my character defects and my defences that defend that, you know, because I can't afford to feel that. I can't afford you to think like that about me. So what do I do? So I act superior. I use my intelligence as a mask. You know, I am distant from people. You know, I use sex as a substitute for intimacy. You know, occasionally I'll have impulse. You know, how do I let go of the stuff that's inside? And I'll have really, you know, impulsive, crazy thoughts. You know, use it after 20 years, whatever it is. You know, you know, and those are my character defects that I am working on a daily basis. You know, that's my step 6.
They stick with you, don't they? I mean.
And I just think in the steps you need to have a clear picture of what they are.
Yeah.
And for me, they're all part of a whole.
Yes.
And I need to see the whole. You know.
It's certainly in terms of pride, it's very much a shared experience. I struggle a lot with pride, quite a lot with pride. That is built out of looking a certain way, being a certain way, hopefully being thought of a certain way. And it is something that I need to work on equally. We all have those things, and it's. Someone much smarter and wiser than me once said in a meeting that it's not something that you have to figure out all right away, that we can work on these things over time. That has given me some perspective on it that I can't, and I'm not getting everything far from it. I don't get everything right, you know, and that when I do mess up with those things, and pride is something that gets in the way a lot with me, that I don't that I don't flog myself immediately, and that there is some space and some time there to work things out, you know, and that is just part of the ism, as you called it, you know, so it's a shared experience.
The other thing I would, you know, add is, you know, just about not being grateful. I just take things for granted. The stuff that I have and the good things that happen to me and the good things that people do for me.
Yeah.
I can just take it for granted.
Attitude of gratitude.
Yeah.
All that. Yeah. Question 10. What is the best thing recovery has given you?
I've been asked this question once before for something else, and I was coming up with all these philosophical high, you know.
Yeah.
When I wake up in the morning, my first thought is not about drinking and using. You know, I have that freedom now. I guess in a way, in those 20 years, you know, when I used to wake up in the morning, I used to have to wake up early in the morning to get into London to go to school. There was part of me that just thought, you know, I might not be thinking about drinking and using, but there was a part of me that just did not, you know, I did not want to be living like this, you know.
Right.
When I wake up in the morning now, my first thought is a prayer, really, you know. I don't really do a gratitude list, but one of the prayers talks about giving thanks, you know. I said, so this is what, you know, what my higher power has given me. I'm grateful for the gift of life, because I'm lucky to be alive. You wouldn't believe what I did, you know, the risks I took when I was injecting. This is obviously something I've thought about. The thing about life is, you know, you have all those experiences, you know, just to experience life, senses, you know, that cognitive thing. You know, if I didn't exist and I didn't experience the world, there'd be nothing, you know. It's such a gift. But also life is very complicated because there's lots of other people who have, you know, who are exactly the same. I'm grateful for the gift of freedom because, you know, I lost my freedom like I spoke about, you know.
Yeah.
And now when I wake up in the morning, I can choose to go out the door when I want to. I don't have to wait for somebody else to unlock it. And I have the, freedom to live my life, and basically, in a sense, the more I realise that freedom is about really living it in line with a higher power, my higher power's will for me today. I have the choices, and then I have to take responsibility for those choices. And then I'm grateful for the gift of sobriety, which is really about spiritual growth, And, so the benefit of sobriety is that, I am, my life in a sense is always new. It talks, we are reborn, but that's an ongoing thing. If I'm growing spiritually, that's ongoing for me. But the other side of that is it involves service, and that's the sort of, so each three of them has like a benefit. And with that benefit goes like a obligation, if you like, or something like that.
Now, question 11. What would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict?
I always go back to what happened to me when I went into that meeting, the thing that made the difference to me, the thing that kept me coming back, was that those people made me feel welcome and that they were kind to me. I would say to a newcomer, we're pleased to see you, well done, keep coming and keep coming back. And then the second thing I'd say is, if we do have a solution. If you want to stop using, if you keep coming back and pay attention to what people say, then it'll work. I suppose if it's somebody keeping, who is, returning, because I've returned and I know how difficult it is, and I've seen other people who really, really struggle. And it's really hard to come back after years of clean time. It seems to be harder for people than stick with it. Really, keep, like it says, keep coming back.
Why do you think it's harder coming back?
For me, it was like I'd lost everything, and the one, at least I had 20 years of clean time where I'd done some good things. So to let go of that experience of my old recovery was really, really difficult. It's really hard to let go of everything I think I know about my own recovery when you've come back, when in a sense that, you've been a bit of an expert. I've been a bit of an expert, is really hard. Something I've just thought of recently is, not only do I not have to let go of everything I think I know about my own recovery, I need to let go of everything I think I know about my own illness as well, which is even, that goes even deeper in a way. For me as well, it was also like I say, false pride, just I see these people, they come back, got their clean time, and, however long it is. I'm thinking of one person in particular, he had over a year clean. He drunk again, and he came back and he was like, day one. The humility that's involved in that, is amazing, I wasn't prepared to do that,
I suppose must be along the lines of I should have known better, really, than to use after X amount of time.
Some of it was me, as it would have tied in around that stuff we were talking about, what people think of me and wanting their acclaim, and, suddenly, having to admit that I was a fraud, Yeah.
And last but not least, question 12, what do you want your higher power to say to you, in quotes, at the pearly gates?
Well, like I said, I am Christian. So come in would be enough for me. I do believe there is some sort of life after death in a way that perhaps is different, but still involves us being individual. I don't know if you know, like the Serenity Prayer is part of a longer prayer.
Go on.
And the last part of it is, that I might be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. After death, there is some sort of like existence where I am still an individual, but I don't have the bondage of self. Perhaps I don't even exist as a self, but I still have some individuality. Just come in is enough for me.
Sounds wonderful. Barry, thank you so much for being my guest today on 12 Steps and 12 Questions. I'd like to thank you for, your honesty and your courage to share so many parts of your life, and for perhaps dropping a little bit of that pride that we both have, and being so humble to come in and speak about your illness and about your wonderful recovery. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-Step Recovery Program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-Step fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not-for-profit. And you know this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.